Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Carper, and I want to thank the witnesses today for sharing your perspectives and expertise. I believe that the deferred action programs that we're discussing today constitute an important step in trying to address our broken immigration system. It will give individuals, families, and employers greater certainty, ensure that more workers are paying taxes and paying into Medicare and Social Security, and allow individuals who contribute to our communities and our economy, in many cases people have been doing so for years, even decades, to come out of the shadows. But make no mistake, these programs, in my opinion, are at best a short-term step because Congress must act. We must act on a comprehensive, permanent reform to our immigration laws. And we've talked already about the fact that the Senate passed such a measure during the last Congress, and while it was not perfect by any means, I voted for it because it's critical to our nation and our economy that we fix the broken system. It's because of that belief that I am frustrated by my colleagues who have chosen to play politics as we consider the Homeland Security Department's funding bill. It puts critical national security programs on the line in order to play out this attack on the President's actions on immigration. And we're having this important hearing today in which we can learn more about making DACA and DAPA work best for our country and our economy, while at the same time, Republican leaders of this chamber are trying to undo these very programs on the Senate floor this week. This is a very important conversation about the economic benefits of making our immigration system work, and I'm glad we're having it. And I hope that all of my colleagues will listen closely so we can get back to working together to advance real and lasting reform in our, that our economy and our communities desperately need. Now, I want to turn to the panel to help us further that discussion. I wanted to start with Mr. Cooper. In your testimony, you outlined some of the estimates from the Council on Economic Advisors, the Congressional Budget Office on the fiscal impacts of these deferred action programs. We heard from Mr. Goss regarding the Social Security Administration's estimates on the impact on the Social Security Trust Fund. From your review of these and other assessments of potential impact of these programs, have you found sources that indicate that they would have a negative impact on our economy?
There certainly are economists who take varying positions on immigration in general. The sources that I've seen, indicate a positive result.
And didn't the Congressional Budget Office actually conclude that eliminating these programs would be a fiscal negative?
Absolutely, a very, very large-scale fiscal negative to the tune of an increase in the federal deficit by $7.5 billion over the coming 10 years.
Mr. Cooper, you've seen the implementation of the original DACA program, which has been in place now for more than 2 years. The Department of Homeland Security has outlined the new resources and personnel that it will put in place to administer DACA and DAPA. I'm wondering, in your opinion, do you believe that the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services will be able to effectively administer these new programs?
I do believe that. They have, the immigration agencies are built to have a capacity to scale because immigration flows and immigration policies evolve. And so that's a dynamic that the agencies have had to contend with always. And as I mentioned before, it's a dynamic that they're especially well equipped to contend with because they get more resources as more applications come in. Resources are statutorily required to match adjudication's demands. In addition, their technological sophistication and their technological relationships and data sharing information, data sharing relationships with law enforcement elsewhere in the federal government at the state level is far more sophisticated than it ever was, and their anti-fraud abilities are far more sophisticated than they have ever been. I understand that FDS is very much engaged in the planning of DACA expansion and DAPA implementation, that they've been involved in interactions with other governments to get document templates, with schools to get exemplars for enrollment materials and all the similar kinds of documentation that would be analyzed to evaluate eligibility. I think they'll face some challenges, of course, but yes, I think they're well equipped to implement these changes.
You just mentioned the ability to focus in on fraud, and by that I interpret, somebody trying to defraud the U.S. government.
Right.
One of the things I've heard from immigration groups is the concern for potential unscrupulous lawyers and notarios who take advantage of the people who are going through the application process. Can you tell me what your experience was in addressing that type of fraud at the INS, and what advice you would have to help us prevent applicants from for these programs from being taken advantage of?
Yes, that's actually an issue that has, I think, a couple of related dimensions. One with respect to notarios, representatives here in the U.S., and the other with respect to smugglers, and the issue that Officer Moran and the chairman were discussing. And they're very closely related. With respect to fraud and unscrupulous representatives, that's an issue that the agencies have been focused on, including the Department of Justice. They bear a very strong role in trying to attack representative fraud for years, and it's gotten better and stronger. There are more significant requirements to qualify as a representative. There are increasingly strict representations that you have to make as a preparer of materials, and there's increased law enforcement vigilance against notarios. And there's a very strong ability as well for the community to report information about this kind of misuse. So I believe that's a very important problem to keep focused on, but one that the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security do have a strong focus on. They also have a lot of anti-fraud measures in place along the lines that we discussed before. The standard of proof, someone who comes forward and requests deferred action has to demonstrate their eligibility, and the standard of proof is more likely than not. Same standard that would apply if any of us sued each other in the courts. And there are criminal and other penalties in place for people who make misrepresentations to the government in order to gain advantages under the immigration statute. So the tools are there. Again, it's a large-scale program. It'll pose challenges, but the tools, I believe, are there. If I could just mention briefly the related issue of abuse, not just by representatives, but also by smugglers. I agree very much with, I understand Officer Moran's frontline experience, and I agree with the concern he expressed that there are people who are engaged in facilitating unlawful migration of this country that are very sophisticated in their ability to help people game the system. And there's no question that that there are smugglers who try to take advantage of that. But to take, for example, the scenario that we were concerned with before, that someone appears at the border and says, "I've been here for 5 years." First of all, in my experience, Border Patrol members tend to have highly refined experience and instincts in these situations, and would be able to see through false statements and examine them. But even if they were to take such a statement at face value, the way the programs are structured, DAPA relief is unavailable to anyone who falls within any of the enforcement priorities, and in the very highest tier of the removal priorities is the category of people who are apprehended while crossing the border.